As you said, you helped make major strides towards peace in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords. Can you describe what it took to accomplish this? And maybe this will help us understand what broke down and led to the tragedy this week.
Yeah. So, I always believed in foreign policy. I learned very quickly that the difference between a political deal and a business deal is that in a business deal, you have a problem set, you come to a conclusion, and then if you buy or sell something, you either have, more cash or you have a company. So, more to do, less to do. Political problem set is very different, where, the conclusion of a problem set is essentially the beginning of a new paradigm. So, when I would think about how do you move pieces around the board? You couldn't say, let me just solve the problem. You have to think about what happens the day after the signing and how do you create a paradigm that has positivity to it. So, the biggest piece of what President Trump did during his 4 years in office was he really strengthened the relationship with Israel, number one. And he did things like recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized the Golan Heights. He got out of the Iran deal. We did an economic conference in Bahrain where we brought Israelis to meet with Saudi and Emirati and Qatari businessmen, and everyone came together. And each one of these instances were unthinkable previously, and everyone said that if you did it, the world was going to end. And every time President Trump did one, the next morning the sun rose, the next evening the sun set, and things moved on. And so by doing that, what President Trump did was he slaughtered a lot of the sacred cows of these false barriers that people had erected, and showed people that the vast majority of the people in the Middle East, whether they're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, whatever religion they are, they just want to live better lives. And so what we basically did was create a paradigm where the voices for peace, the voices for together, now finally had a forum in it where they were able to do it. And we did that in the backdrop. The way we were able to be successful was we severely limited the resources of Iran, and they were focused more internally, and they couldn't cause the trouble that they were causing everywhere else. Since we've left, obviously the dynamics have changed, but the way you get to peace is obviously number one through strength, and number two by finding a way for people to be better off tomorrow than they are today. And what I found was that most of the voices looking for violence or trouble were people who were just focused on what happened 2 years ago, 20 years ago, 70 years ago, 1,000 years ago. People who were trying to solve those problems in that context often were looking more to use those past grievances as a justification for their power and for the bad behavior that they were looking to perpetuate.
So, managing, as we have talked about extensively, managing the power dynamics of the region and providing a plan. And this is something you did with the economic plan titled Peace to Prosperity, a Vision to Improve the Lives of the Palestinian and Israeli People. Can you first of all describe what's in the plan?
Sure. So this was something I took on. I was working on the political framework between the Israelis and the Palestinians and trying to understand what were the issues. And the issues were not very many. It basically was you had a land dispute, so you had to figure out where do you put borders ultimately. You had a security a paradigm, which I was much more favorable to Israel's perspective on. And obviously the events of the past 48 hours have fully justified that bias. And then in addition to that, you had to deal with the religious sites. But I felt operationally that wasn't actually as complicated as people made it, because you wanted to just leave it open for everybody. Then I went through and I felt that the Palestinian leadership was fairly disincentivized to make a deal, because there was just this paradigm where they had billions of dollars coming in from the international community. And I think that they feared that if they made a deal, they would lose their relevancy internationally and the money would stop flowing into the country. So what I tried to do is to say, my approach when I would get into a hard problem, say, how do I understand all the different escape hatches? How do I try to eliminate them and then build a golden bridge that becomes really the only, but also the most desirable pathway for the decision makers to walk through? And it wasn't always hard, and sometimes you have to go and hold their hand, or you try to pick them up and walk them across. But a lot of these leaders are very reluctant to change, and the dynamics of the Palestinians also were such that I think they were fairly stuck where they were. So we developed a business plan for Gaza, the West Bank. We threw in some improvements for Jordan and Egypt as well. I based it off of the Vision 2030 that they did in Saudi Arabia, which I thought was a visionary document. I went back through this process and I studied basically every economic project in the post-World War II period. So we looked at what they did in South Korea, why it was successful with some strong industrial planning. We looked at Japan. We looked at Singapore. We looked at Poland, why it was successful. We spent a lot of time on the Ukraine plan for the country and why it wasn't successful. And that was mostly because of governance and corruption, which actually resembles a lot of what's gone wrong with the Palestinians, where there's no property rights, there's no rule of law. And what we did is we built a plan to show, it's not that hard, right? In the sense that between the West Bank and Gaza, you had 5 million people. And we put together a plan. I think it was about $27 billion. We got together a conference. I had the head of AT&T. We had Steve Schwartzman from Blackstone came, which was very gracious of them. We had all the leading Arabic businessmen, the leading builders, leading developers, and the general consensus of that conference was that this is very doable. We think that for Gaza in particular, it would cost maybe $7 to $8 billion to rebuild the entire place. We felt we could reduce the poverty rate in half. We can create over 1 million jobs there. The only thing that people said was holding it back wasn't Israel. What was holding it back was governance, and people wouldn't have confidence investing there with the rule that Hamas was perpetuating. So I encourage people actually to look at the plan. It was very thoughtful. It was 181 pages. We went project by project. Each project is costed out. It's a real plan that could be implemented, but you need the right governance. And all of the different Arabic countries are willing to fund it. The international community is willing to fund it because they've just been throwing so much money at the Palestinians for years. That's never been outcomes-based or conditions-based. It's just been, entitlement money. And unfortunately, it hasn't really achieved any outcomes that have been successful. So it's a great business plan. It just shows too, rebuilding Gaza, could be easy. But like I said, the problem that's held the Palestinian people back and that's made their lives terrible in Gaza has not been Israel. It's really been Hamas's leadership or lack of leadership and their desire to focus on trying to kill Israelis and start war with Israel over improving the lives of the Palestinian people.
And the current approach of Hamas, the more violence they perpetrate, the more they can hold on to power versus improving the lives of people. So they, as you said, maybe you can comment on, they do not propose an economics plan.
I mean, Hamas has been running it now for 16 years, and they don't have a lot to show for it. And, our posture with them was basically a very simple deal. If you think about what's the end state in Gaza, it's actually not that complicated. It's, there's no territorial disputes, right? The border's the border. There's no religious issues there as well. You're not dealing with Jerusalem. You're basically just dealing with the fact that, Israel wants to make sure that there's no threat from Gaza. So it's a demilitarization or some kind of security guarantee from a credible source where Israel doesn't feel like Gaza can be used to stage attacks into Israel or to fire rockets into Israel. And by the way, these are things I was saying, 3-4 years ago, that was the objective. And that was really the fear. Now that's been proven, unfortunately, the fear has manifested. And in exchange, you can rebuild the place and you can give the people a much better life. But Hamas has not shown a desire for that or a capability for that. And I don't think there's enough trust to allow them to do that, which is why, under the current circumstances, if you do want to have peace there, Hamas has to be either eliminated or severely degraded in terms of their military capabilities.